Hi, this is Emma back with more writing videos. Last week we covered AP Language and Composition. We went over the analytical essay. This week we're going to discuss the persuasive essay. So last week we went over a specific passage for the analytical essay, and this week we're going to do the same thing with the persuasive, but first I'm going to do this presentation about a few things to keep in mind going into writing the persuasive essay. In a persuasive essay, you're going to be given a topic, whether that is a quote, a passage, a statement, or some other kind of prompt. You're going to be asked to take a stance on the cause and use some sort of evidence to back up your argument. This video can also function as a helpful guide through an SAT essay, though you're going to have a lot less time on those, about half the time that you're going to have on an AP Language persuasive essay. However, it is the same basic model of taking a stance on a persuasive essay. Again, just before we really get into the meat of this, these are all more suggestions than anything else. They're things to keep in mind and that have led to consistently successful essays for specific people. With that, let's move on to the different kind of prompts that you're going to receive on a persuasive essay. So I've broken down the prompts into three main categories. The first of which is a passage kind of prompt. We'll go over these a little bit more in depth. Then a statement prompt, and thirdly a quote prompt. So here is an example of a passage prompt. This is from the 2001 AP, and here you see that you've been given someone else's perspective, and then you're being asked to address your own feelings on the subject when you write your essay, but you're given this large chunk of text that is all examining someone else's perspective. So that would be the passage persuasive prompt. Notice they're not asking you to analyze this text. This is not an analytical prompt, and that is one of the common mistakes that we're going to discuss later. Next, the statement. So this basically, it is going to be a statement that someone else has made, or a statement that the prompt kind of implies to be truth. And it perhaps, like in this passage, it's going to be given some context, discussing Plato, Aristotle, and Sartre. And it's asking you to come up with your own opinion on this statement. And third, the quote. So these persuasive essays can really be very much unintentionally biased towards the person who has by chance read something on the topic that they're asked to discuss. Your personal experiences are going to dictate oftentimes your success in these kinds of essays, which is why it's helpful in persuasive essays to come in with a variety of examples. That's something else that we're going to go over. So for instance, this is a quote from Lear, and if you've read Lear, then you're going to understand the quote a lot better, and it'll take you a lot less time to get through the prompt, and you'll have a more full understanding as you go into the essay. Whereas if you've never read Lear, this might be a difficult quote to break down and get through, but this is another kind of prompt that you're going to get. It's going to give you a quote from a book, from a speech, and then you're going to be asked to understand this quote, which means that you're going to have to take some time to read through it and figure out what it means, as well as argue your opinion on this statement by Lear. Next, we're going to look at what is the prompt asking you to do. What is the AP looking for? And really, it comes down to these two things. They're going to ask you to take a side. They're going to ask you to use evidence. And so now I'm going to show you a random assortment of prompts that in different wording tell you to do the same thing. We're going over this because, as I've mentioned in previous videos, the prompt often has lots of juicy information that is going to help guide you through your essay. So you want to take a long time to read through and really understand what you're being asked to do. Here is a prompt from 2002, and it says, carefully read the following passage from Testaments Betrayed by Czech writer Milan Kundera. Then write an essay in which you support, qualify, or dispute Kundera's claim. Support your argument with appropriate evidence. Here, I've put in dark red the part about taking a side, and in red the part about evidence. So you're being asked to, and we're going to go through these three options: take a side, use evidence. Back to taking a side, using evidence. Now, write a thoughtful and carefully constructed essay. Now this is kind of a silly part of the prompt because, of course, that's the goal of every student. No one's trying to write a poorly constructed and horribly argued essay. It seems to me something that they just feel like they need to throw in. But anyway, these things are important. Using specific evidence to defend, challenge, or qualify this assertion. Again, that comes back to taking a side, using evidence. Third, and this one is from 2007, so really these are from many different years. They're all going to have different wording, but ask you basically the same thing. Here is develop a position, and then it tells you specifically where you can get your evidence from: reading, observation, and or experience, which really encompasses a whole lot of stuff. Again, all these prompts come back to two things: taking a side and using evidence. And the first thing we're going to go over is how to take a side. What are they asking you to do? In these prompts, we've seen three things. We've seen them ask you to take a side by challenging, defending, or qualifying. First, let's examine what they're asking you when they say, challenge this assertion. Well, it's kind of what it sounds like. You're going to oppose whatever argument they're making completely. It's not a nuanced argument. You're going to say, no, you're wrong. This is the opposing argument and this is why it's right. If you choose to challenge a prompt, you would want to address the arguments in the prompt and refute their validity, and then you would want to bring up new points. Next, it gives you the option of defending. So defending would be taking the same side presented in the prompt or the passage. So if you did this, you wouldn't want to use the same examples that are used in the prompt or passage. You would want it to come from your own imagination. And that's why defending can kind of be a fine line to walk, because you want to make sure that you're coming up with new arguments, not just rephrasing the ones that have been previously stated in the prompt. And so, though it can be a healthy mental exercise to defend or to challenge, to simply agree or disagree with the prompt is limiting. You limit yourself in your essay immediately by just deciding to challenge or defend. It prevents you, the writer, from expressing deeper and more nuanced thought. So my teacher, who has taught AP language for many years and has seen much success, from the very beginning strongly suggested that we qualify on as many of our essays as possible because it lends itself to a stronger argument. Now, what is qualifying? As you can imagine, it's a bit more difficult to qualify than to simply challenge or defend. So, qualifying, you are taking a definitive stance. You are definitely making an argument, but you're also recognizing the opposing stance. It is going to create a nuanced argument that is ultimately more complex than only recognizing one side. It really is a matter of practice and repetition, but I'm going to show you some examples of how to turn from a prompt to a more thoughtful and thought-provoking essay. I would really recommend qualifying in some way on every persuasive essay, unless you are specifically informed not to. As qualifying, as I've explained, can be a bit more difficult to wrap your mind around, I'm going to go into it more in depth than I did challenging and defending. Qualifying can be thought of as this concession assertion model. Really, it just means that you're conceding something about the validity of the other argument but then you're going to come back with an assertion that overpowers that concession. So that assertion is going to be your argument, but you're also going to address this concession, this opposing side. And that's really what a qualified thesis will look like. I often use this while construction. It is an easy tool to present your argument and to demonstrate to the reader the emphasis of your thesis, which, by the way, is where you're going to qualify. The thesis is your argument, so in your thesis you're going to challenge, qualify, or defend. The while construction. Let's give a pretty basic example. Let's say my first thesis is, Joseph's goofy personality prevents me from paying attention to him. Here, I only present the idea that Joseph's goofy personality, it doesn't sit well with me. Whereas here, in example 2, I concede the fact that while Joseph occasionally has insightful ideas, this is a bit more nuanced. He does have good ideas, it's just that, and here is the main assertion of my argument, his goofy personality often detracts, sorry, that should be an S, from his serious contributions, and that is my assertion. Of course, this is kind of a goofy example, just like Joseph, and it really is only an example of a thesis standing on its own. In a real essay, you'll also want to have an introduction, which is what we'll go over here. Your introduction should discuss the author's initial assertion, either summarize the quote or recap the main arguments of the passage, or perhaps give a history of the issue that the statement presents, and it should demonstrate to the reader that you know what you're talking about, and that you're starting from this foundation of understanding. This prompt, you can look it up, it's a prompt on Money and Class in America, it's an AP language prompt. My introduction discusses the prompt. So you almost don't even need to see the passage, because I should, in my introduction, give an overall idea about the issue. So I say, in his Money and Class in America, Lewis Lapham argues that Americans, more than citizens of other countries, rely on money and material goods to quantify intangibles like happiness, success, or knowledge. Let's say that I want to agree with what Lapham is arguing, and in that I would be defending his assertion. Then I would perhaps say, Americans have always relied on money to validate their success. I apologize for this little success. I wrote something that didn't make much sense and thought that my lovely handwriting should be witnessed on this video. Anyway, if I'm only defending this argument, that is what my thesis would look like, and that is what my entire essay would look like. It would only be discussing the reasons why Americans have always relied on money to validate their success. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's the truth, and that's what I believe strongly. But the way I would go about writing a more nuanced and complex essay would be to discuss some sort of caveat, some sort of nuance in this phenomenon where Americans rely on money and material goods. So I say in my second thesis, I use this concession assertion construction. While there have been attempts to enlighten the American public about the dangers of this reliance on materialism, ultimately the trend of Americans basing their success and happiness on money is supported by studies and seen throughout history. Now, this isn't a perfect essay, it's not a perfect thesis, but you have 45 minutes to write an essay, and that's something else I want to address. The College Board isn't looking for a perfectly polished final draft. They know that this is going to be your first draft, and that's okay. What I have done here is that with this concession, I give myself a lot more to talk about in my essay. I know that I'm going to talk about these attempts to enlighten the American public, and I'm going to probably spend a paragraph or two on that, and then I'm going to say, despite this, I have this argument about studies and historical facts that supports my cause. And in every argument that I've ever seen, the side that addresses their opponent and doesn't just talk blindly about their own perspective, that side is always the stronger debater, the stronger argument, because you know that they've thought about every argument involved. They've thought about the issue, and they're ultimately saying, yeah, this is important, but look at my argument. It's more important. And that is the power of qualifying. It gives you a lot more to work with in your essay, a lot more to discuss, and B, it gives you a stronger essay. And also we'll be breaking down a prompt even more specifically later on. But moving on, let's go to, quickly we'll do one more example. Here, my introduction discusses an essay by James Baldwin argues that language is a key to revealing nearly everything about people and establishes their relationships with those around them. So here I've given a general summary, again, of the passage of the quote, and next I'm going to state my own argument, which is in the thesis. My thesis reads, while having a specific accent or speaking a specific language distinguishes many people from the general population, judgment associated with lingual anomalies differs based on the cultural association with that language. There's a type of self-imposed judgment that is associated with pride, another with shame, and another with outright biases. In my thesis, I don't necessarily agree or disagree with James Baldwin because he's just kind of made this general statement that language reveals a lot about people. Now I have to decide where I'm going to go with that, because it's hard to say, yes, language reveals everything about people, or no, it doesn't. Those are kind of large topics to cover. Really, I need to, in my thesis, set the boundaries for my essay and just kind of set a roadmap for what I'm going to discuss within this general prompt of language reveals everything. So I've discussed the fact that my concession is, while having a specific accent distinguishes many people, my assertion is more nuanced in that I say I'm going to discuss this cultural association with accents and language, and I'm going to discuss 3 specific types of cultural associations. I'm going to talk about this self-imposed judgment that is associated with pride. So here I might talk about how if you speak the same language as someone else, there's an immediate tie. Another with shame. I believe I used Silence of the Lambs as my argument, where Hannibal Lecter tells Clarice Starling, he points out her Virginian accent, and this is tied to her background that she's ashamed of. And then another one with biases, and I talk about racism and prejudice there. So here I take this general topic of language as a revealing factor about someone, and I delve deeper and I pick out little facets of the entire topic that I want to discuss. And that is an argument. It's just a little bit less, this is wrong, this is right. Okay, so now that we're done with going over theses and introductions and how to qualify, now we're going to move on to the evidence. Now, evidence comes from a myriad of places. It can be current events, technology, literature, other art forms, sports, other areas of school. History is one that I use a lot, science, music, math, psychology, philosophy, bio, which is science. So I remember once using the law of conservation of energy in an AP Lit essay, and it really just goes to show, 1, that I learned something in physics, and 2, that these AP writing courses really force you to take these disparate pieces of information that you've accrued in and out of school and then synthesize them into something thoughtful and perhaps more meaningful than they are on their own. So many people don't see it this way, but English can serve as this really cool opportunity to cross the divide between subjects. Another thing that is often used are personal examples. So I would suggest that you don't go too far with these. They definitely can help supplement your argument when used in the right way, but non-personal examples are definitely stronger when driving a thesis. When I wrote these persuasive essays, I used a lot of books and I used a lot of historical facts because I was taking AP US history at the same time, which was very nice to kind of supplement language. And then I also used podcasts with mine. So if you like to do stuff like listen to NPR, if you read a lot of books or read the newspaper, even watch movies, all of this will really help when coming up with examples. Another thing to note is when using books, if there's a choice, you would want to use one with some literary clout. If you can't think of anything but, say, The Hunger Games, and you're running out of time, go ahead, use that example. And you might be saying, but The Hunger Games are such an awesome series, and I definitely agree with you. I really love The Hunger Games. I love the series. And honestly, it might not count that much against you. It's just that if you use another more renowned work of literature within the dystopian genre with similar themes, say 1984, then I would suggest using that example, as it will generally appeal more to the readers. Your teacher and the AP readers are going to appreciate that well-respected book. Some books that I used frequently were Brave New World, Long Way Gone. Long Way Gone is a bit more obscure. It's Memoirs of a Boy Soldier, and it's a great read just on its own. 1984 and Fahrenheit 451. These are all kind of dystopian novels that are very famous, but except for Long Way Gone, and Long Way Gone's actually not even in the dystopian genre. It's a nonfiction, it's a memoir. But they all have very clear overarching themes, but also they have these subplots and these very intricate smaller themes. They also have memorable quotes. Quotes from books are gold when it comes to writing a persuasive essay. If you can remember a quote from Fahrenheit 451, when was the last time you were really bothered about something important, about something real? That's a quote from Fahrenheit 451 that I used often. It just helps to have a few solid examples ready to use if you need them. Next, let's go over some common mistakes seen in essays, and this is kind of a compilation of my own experience and a variety of online sources that kind of seem to confirm my thoughts on these common mistakes made in persuasive essays for the AP language. So the first mistake is not understanding the task or the directions, and really this is such an easy one to fix. The answer is to read, and then to read, and to read again, and to make sure you really, really understand the passage. The next mistake is merely paraphrasing the passage and not taking a stance. The answer to this, take a stance. You want to have an argument. Make sure that your thesis is something you can prove. And this next mistake goes along with that, not taking a definite stand. Well, take a strong stance. That means you want to make sure your reader knows what you're going to be arguing. Having a qualifying thesis does not mean that you're going to have a weak stance. In fact, it means it's going to be stronger because you're going to address the other side, but you also have to make sure that you refute it then, or that you prove why your assertion is stronger than your concession. Next, weak or inappropriate evidence. Now, with evidence, you want to ask yourself a few things. Who is my audience, and who am I trying to convince? And also, is this a logical addition to my argument? Your Game of Thrones reference may well convince your buddy who you watch Game of Thrones with, a quality show, but will it convince your teacher? Now, maybe your teacher loves Daenerys and, is obsessed with Game of Thrones, and he or she will give you a 9 automatically on your essay. But the chances are that your AP reader is not going to find Game of Thrones a book with the same, or a book series, or even a television show with the same acclaim as a discussion of the Odyssey or Mountains Beyond Mountains. And so I definitely say if you're not sure about it, which you aren't on the actual AP, stick to things that are well respected in the literary community, not just, amongst friends, even though Game of Thrones is a wonderful series. Finally, the final problem, and this is a big one, is analyzing instead of arguing. And it's going to have the same answer as many of the other ones. you need to take a stance and make an argument. You are also going to take a stance and make an argument in an analytical essay, but your argument is going to be based in the text for an analytical essay. It's going to argue about the way in which the writer conveys his or her meaning through his or her language. Whereas in an argumentative essay, you want to take a strong stance, and it's going to come from your own experience. Again, all those things that we talked about with the evidence, your own reading, you're taking outside information and synthesizing it into a strong stance into your argument. It's not based in the text. It is difficult to make this mistake with statements that are very short, but when they give you a passage, make sure you read the prompt, and if it says take a position and use evidence, that is a sign that you are going to be writing a persuasive essay about your ideas on this topic. And that's what I thought was really fun about writing this kind of essay. And that is it for this basic overview of the persuasive essay. I hope it was helpful. In the next video, we'll go over a prompt about humor. We'll take the prompt, we'll annotate, and I'll kind of show you how I break it down in my own essay, and hopefully that can also be helpful if this was a bit too general. Anyway, thank you for watching, and tune in for the next video if you think that sounds like it would be helpful for you.